So here's a question. Why is it that the people who see themselves as the most open-minded, the most progressive, the good guys, why do they often react with the most intense, almost volcanic anger when their racial views are challenged?
It's a real paradox, isn't it? You'd think they would be the most open to feedback.
Exactly. But the book we're talking about today argues the complete opposite is true. And we think this book, well, it really requires a different kind of approach. So enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. More than just a summary, which we also include, this feature examines how the author shapes argument, builds influence, and earns or loses your trust. It'll give you the tools to read with sharper insight and greater discernment.
Should you read this book? This should really help you decide. It's also excellent for aspiring writers.
And if you find this expanded format valuable, we would love to hear from you. Your feedback helps guide our future content.
And just so you're fully aware, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Today, we are walking right into the storm. We're tackling a book that has been absolutely unavoidable in cultural conversations since it came out in 2018. We are talking about white fragility. Why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism, published by Beacon Press.
This is one of those rare books that didn't just hit the New York Times bestseller list. I mean, it stayed there for years. It became the default manual for corporate HR, for school boards, book clubs, all across America.
But here's the deal for today's conversation. We aren't just going to give you a book report. We're splitting this up. We'll spend maybe the first quarter of our time making sure we all understand the core concepts, getting us on the same page. But then, we are dedicating the vast majority of this, 75%, to a really critical analysis.
Yeah, we have to look at the methodology, the controversy, and frankly, the logical structure of the argument itself. Because whether you love this book or you hate it, you really need to understand how the author, Robin DiAngelo, constructs her case.
Okay, let's start right there with the title itself, White Fragility. When I first heard it, I'll be honest, it kind of felt like a slap in the face. It sounds like an insult, right?
Yeah.
Like you're calling someone a snowflake.
That is the common knee-jerk reaction, but no. DiAngelo uses it as a very specific, almost clinical term. She is explicit that this is not about a personality flaw. It's not about being weak.
So what is it then?
She defines white fragility as a state of being, specifically for white people, where they've lived with so much racial comfort for so long that they have, well, literally no stamina for racial stress.
So it's like a muscle that has atrophied because it just never gets used.
Exactly. Because white people in Western societies are generally insulated from that kind of stress, even a minimal amount, like someone saying, hey, that joke was a bit off, it becomes intolerable. And because it's intolerable, it triggers a massive defensive response.
And we have all seen these responses. In meetings, at dinner parties. The book lists them out, things like crying or yelling or just storming out of the room.
Right, or even shutting down into a stony silence. But here's the key insight from the summary. DiAngelo argues these aren't just random emotional outbursts.
They have a purpose.
They perform a function. They work to restore what she calls white racial equilibrium.
Equilibrium. Okay, so that implies a return to balance. So if I freak out, the whole conversation just stops.
Precisely. The outburst forces the other person, who is usually a person of color, to back off, maybe apologize, or even comfort you. The challenge is repelled, and you get to go back to feeling comfortable. The status quo is protected.
Okay, so who is she actually targeting with this book? Because I think a lot of people might assume, well, I'm not a white supremacist, so she can't be talking to me.
And that is the trap. DiAngelo is explicitly not talking to open racists. Her specific target audience is white progressives. She's writing for the well-intentioned liberals who, voted for Obama, go to marches, and who deeply believe they are not racist.
And this leads to maybe the biggest idea in the book, the difference between individual racism and systemic racism.
Yes. If you take nothing else away from this part, take this. DiAngelo wants us to stop thinking of racism as just an event, like a slur or a hate crime. She frames it as a system, a web of unequal power and resources that has been running for centuries.
And in that system, whiteness isn't just a skin color, it's a position, a socially constructed identity that comes with automatic advantages, which are usually invisible to the people who have them.
Which brings us right to the good person trap. This is the barrier that DiAngelo is trying to smash through.
I found this part fascinating, but also really challenging. We have this binary view of the world. Good people are not racist. Bad people are racist. That feels, it feels intuitive. Why is that a problem?
It feels intuitive, but it paralyzes the conversation. Think about it. If you believe that only bad people can be racist, then if someone suggests you have a racial bias,
They're not just giving you feedback.
exactly, in your mind, they're attacking your soul. They are saying you are a bad person.
Do I have to defend my goodness at all costs? I can't even listen to you because I'm too busy proving I'm not a monster.
Precisely. DiAngelo argues we need to kill that binary so we can actually look at our behavior without all that moral panic.
Okay, that's the theory. We have the definition, the audience, the systemic framing. But now I want to shift gears. We need to look at how she builds this case. This is where we get into the analysis. When we look at the evidence she uses, what are we actually looking at? I didn't see a lot of charts and graphs.
This is where the critical thinking cap needs to come on tight. So, DiAngelo is a sociologist, but her primary role is as a diversity trainer. Her evidence is almost entirely experiential and interpretive. She relies on anecdotes from her 20 years of running workshops.
So instead of hard data sets, we're getting stories. A woman crying in a seminar, a man shouting that he treats everyone the same.
Right. And rhetorically, she uses a very specific strategy. In terms of ethos, her credibility, she positions herself as a white insider. She's not judging from on high. She's saying, I am one of you. I have these same conditioned responses. I'm critiquing our group from within.
That's disarming. It feels like she's a confidant. But she also uses a ton of pathos emotion, doesn't she?
Oh, absolutely. She creates scenes designed to make you uncomfortable. When she describes a white woman's tears stopping a workshop cold and forcing all the black participants to comfort her, she wants you to feel that cringe. She wants to vividly illustrate how white feelings end up centering themselves, even in anti-racism training.
However, and this is a big however, there's a logical structure here that has driven some critics absolutely up the wall. We have to talk about the circular logic.
This is the Kafka trap. It's the most common intellectual critique of the book, that the theory of white fragility is essentially unfalsifiable.
Break that down for us. What do you mean unfalsifiable?
Okay, so imagine I accuse you of being fragile. If you agree with me and say, yes, I see that, then the theory is proven. You've admitted it.
Okay, sure. Makes sense.
But if you deny it, if you say, no, I am not fragile, I just disagree with your point, DiAngelo codes that denial as evidence of your fragility.
Wait, hold on. So arguing against the diagnosis is proof that you have the disease.
Exactly. And that is the problem. It pathologizes legitimate disagreement. If all dissent is just labeled as a defensive emotional reaction, how do we ever have a genuine debate about the ideas themselves?
It feels like a rigged carnival game. It suggests that once you enter this framework, the only logical way out is total submission.
It creates a closed loop. And critics ask a valid question. Does this framework allow a white person to disagree with a person of color or with a diversity trainer without that disagreement being dismissed as a character flaw? It is a tension the book never really resolves.
We are going to put a pin in that heavy thought for just a second.
Before we continue this analysis, we just want to mention Mindful Moments. It's our YouTube channel, and it offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It is all about inspiring reflection and rational thought. If you are enjoying this deep analysis, check out the visual and expanded content over there.
All right, we are back. We've looked at the logic, but I want to look at the ethics. DiAngelo focuses so heavily, almost exclusively, on white psychology. She is trying to get white people to look in the mirror. But does this obsession with the white psyche have a downside?
Some critics argue that it paradoxically recenters whiteness.
How so? I thought the whole point was to stop centering whiteness.
Well, think about where the energy is going. By spending so much time dissecting white feelings, white tears, white defensiveness, white guilt, are we actually talking about racism anymore, or are we just talking about white people again?
It becomes a bit narcissistic, sort of, look at how hard I'm working on my anti-racism.
Exactly. Instead of focusing on the systemic harm done to people of color, the spotlight swings right back to the internal drama of the white liberal.
There's also a really biting critique about how the book portrays black people. You mentioned John McWhorter in the research notes. He did not pull any punches on this.
No, he did not. John McWhorter is a linguist and a cultural commentator, and he argues that DiAngelo's approach is incredibly paternalistic. He suggests the book treats black people as if they are fragile China dolls.
China dolls, that is a strong image.
He means the book implies that black people are somehow incapable of handling conflict or hearing a clumsy comment without being devastated.
So the idea that white people need to constantly tiptoe around racial issues.
McWhorter argues that tiptoeing is dehumanizing. It suggests Black people aren't equal adults capable of engaging in robust, sometimes messy interactions. It sets up this dynamic where white people are the powerful but guilty actors, and Black people are these fragile victims who need protection.
That's a crucial counterpoint. It forces us to ask, what does genuine equality look like? Is it walking on eggshells, or is it having the resilience to handle real disagreement?
Right. Are we building a society of mutual respect or a society of mutual anxiety?
Let's zoom out even further. We like to judge these books by how they align with core democratic values: justice, equality, liberty. How does White Fragility score?
Well, if we look at justice and equality, the book scores very high. Its entire mission is to rectify historical wrongs. DiAngelo is demanding that we face the reality of unequal outcomes and actually do something about it.
But liberty, that is where it gets sticky, isn't it?
That is where the tension lies, yes. Go back to that circular logic we discussed. If dissent is labeled as fragility, that can chill free inquiry. Liberty relies on the ability to question, to debate, and to hold different viewpoints without being socially punished for it.
If a framework demands total ideological conformity to be considered a good person, that is fundamentally at odds with the concept of free expression.
It is. And that's why this book generates such polarized reactions. It's championing equality, but it's doing so with methods that some feel threaten liberty.
It's helpful to remember that DiAngelo isn't the only voice in the room. If we place this book on a shelf next to others, where does it fit? Sometimes it feels like people think this is the only book on race.
It's a great question. You have someone like Michelle Alexander, who wrote The New Jim Crow. She focuses on structural legal systems, specifically the criminal justice system. Her work is concrete. It's about laws, policies, statistics.
Whereas DiAngelo is entirely psychological.
Right. She's in the realm of the interpersonal. Then you have someone like Ibram X. Kendi, who focuses on definitions and policy. For him, being anti-racist is all about supporting policies that create equity.
And the source material mentioned James Baldwin as a necessary pairing.
Yes. Baldwin is often cited as providing the deeper ethical and humanistic vision. Baldwin writes about the soul, about love, the deep tragedy of American history in a way that just transcends a training module. If DiAngelo is the clinical diagnosis, Baldwin is the human spirit trying to survive it.
I like that distinction. So let's bring this to the wisdom level. We talk about Adler's intellectual hierarchy, moving from opinion to knowledge to wisdom.
Right. So at the opinion level, a reader might just feel guilty or angry after reading this. That's a surface reaction.
And knowledge is just being able to define the terms. I know what white fragility is.
But wisdom, that highest level, is application. It is using these insights to examine one's own defensiveness without falling into the trap of fatalism or just self-flagellation.
So it's about asking, am I reacting this way because my ego is bruised? And if I am, can I set that aside to hear what's actually being said?
Exactly. The goal isn't guilt. Guilt is useless. The goal is what DiAngelo calls racial stamina, the ability to stay in the room, handle the stress, and do the work, rather than just performing goodness.
That seems like the healthy takeaway. You can accept the diagnosis that we are defensive without necessarily accepting every single prescription the author offers.
Which brings us to the universalizability test, which I think is a fascinating way to wrap your head around the book's utility.
How does that work here?
Well, imagine if everyone adopted the best parts of this book. If everyone decided to listen more, to lower their defenses, to acknowledge they might have blind spots, society would improve. Our discourse would be more humane.
But if everyone adopted the worst parts?
If everyone adopted the tendency to label all disagreement as fragility or to pathologize every interaction, then public discourse becomes rigid, paranoid, and dogmatic.
So the challenge for the listener, for you, is to extract the wisdom. Can we accept the diagnosis that systemic racism is real and that we often react defensively while critically debating the prescription?
Is focusing so intensely on white psychology the best fix? Or is it, as critics suggest, a distraction from material change? That's the open question you have to answer for yourself.
This has been a fascinating look at a book that is, well, much more complex than the headlines often suggest.
It certainly is.
If you want to dive even deeper, click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Please subscribe, share, and if you're interested in the book, you can purchase via the link. Most importantly, continue to think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.